Nobody ever changed their life because of something forgettable. It is always the unexpected thought, arriving at exactly the right moment, that refuses to leave. And what you are about to hear is one of those thoughts. There is something quietly extraordinary about the fact that you have never once had to remind your heart to beat. Not in 60 years, not in 70, not across the thousands of nights you slept without awareness while your body continued its vast, invisible labor, circulating blood, repairing tissue, filtering waste, balancing chemistry with a precision that no laboratory instrument has ever fully replicated. This is not a small thing. This is, in the truest sense, the miracle hiding inside the ordinary. And yet somewhere along the way, modern medicine, brilliant and necessary as it is, began to speak to us in a language that subtly repositioned the body. From a living, self-correcting intelligence, it became, in the popular imagination, something closer to a machine prone to breakdown, something that required external intervention to function, something that needed to be fixed rather than supported. The pharmacy became more familiar than the garden. The prescription pad became more instinctive than the kitchen. And in that quiet, cultural shift, we began to lose trust in the very system that had kept us alive without our permission for every single moment of our existence. But the biology tells a different story. Every cell in your body carries within it repair mechanisms of staggering sophistication. Your immune system identifies and destroys thousands of abnormal cells each day without you feeling a thing. Your kidneys adjust the mineral balance of your blood in real time, responding to what you eat, what you drink, how much you move, how well you slept. Your endothelium, that single-cell-thick lining stretched across the entire inner surface of your cardiovascular system, which if laid flat would cover several tennis courts, is constantly sensing, signaling, adapting, negotiating with the blood that flows across it. This is not passive machinery. This is active, responsive, breathtakingly intelligent biology. What food does, in this context, is not cure or rescue. It provides the raw materials and the molecular signals that either enrich that intelligence or quietly erode it. A dietary nitrate from a beetroot does not force a blood vessel to relax. It provides the substrate from which the body produces its own signal, nitric oxide, through its own enzymatic processes, on its own terms. A polyphenol from a berry does not switch off inflammation like a circuit breaker. It modulates the cellular environment in which inflammatory processes either escalate or subside. The body remains the author of its own biology. Food is simply the vocabulary it is given to work with. This matters enormously for how we approach the years after 60, because so much of the conversation around aging is framed as loss. Loss of function, loss of resilience, loss of biological capacity. And while change is real and undeniable, the framing of decline can become its own kind of harm, leading us to abandon the very behaviors that would most support the body's enduring capacity to regulate, restore, and sustain itself across whatever years remain. There is a particular kind of change that is most dangerous precisely because it announces itself so quietly. Not the sudden fracture, not the acute pain that demands immediate attention, but the slow, accumulated shift that happens beneath the threshold of awareness, gradual enough to feel like nothing, significant enough to reshape everything. Arterial stiffening is exactly this kind of change, and understanding it is perhaps the most important piece of biological self-knowledge a person over 60 can carry. Your arteries, in their healthiest state, are not rigid pipes. They are living tissues, layered, elastic, dynamic structures that actively participate in the movement of blood rather than merely containing it. With every heartbeat, a wave of pressure travels outward from the heart, and healthy arteries do something remarkable in response. They expand slightly to receive that wave, absorbing its force, and then recoil to help propel the blood further along its journey. This expansive, elastic quality, called vascular compliance, is one of the most quietly vital functions in the human body. and it is one that most of us never think about until it begins to diminish. And diminish it does, with time. The walls of arteries are rich in a protein called elastin, which gives them their youthful suppleness. But elastin degrades slowly over the decades and is not efficiently replaced. Simultaneously, another structural protein, collagen, accumulates in the arterial walls, and collagen is far stiffer, far less forgiving in its nature. The balance shifts year by year from elastic to rigid. Calcium deposits may begin to gather within the arterial walls, further reducing their flexibility. The vessels that were once generous and yielding become progressively more resistant, more unyielding to the rhythmic pressure of each heartbeat. The consequence of this is not abstract. When arteries lose their compliance, the pressure required to move blood through them rises. The heart, that extraordinarily faithful muscle, responds the only way it can, by working harder, contracting with greater force, sustaining higher pressures across each cycle. What registers on a blood pressure cuff as an elevated number is, in biological reality, the echo of this accumulated structural change, the heart pressing against a system that no longer yields as gracefully as it once did. What makes this particularly worthy of reflection is the relationship between arterial stiffening and inflammation. Because the process is not purely mechanical, it is also biochemical. Chronic, low-grade inflammation, the kind that produces no fever and no obvious symptoms, contributes directly to the degradation of arterial elasticity over time. Free radicals generated through normal metabolic processes, compounded by dietary choices, by stress, by sedentary living, by the slow oxidative wear of decades, leave their mark on the endothelial lining, triggering inflammatory cascades that further compromise the structural integrity of vessel walls. Arterial stiffening is, in this sense, both a mechanical and an inflammatory story. And it is a story that begins far earlier than the diagnosis, quietly accumulating across years before any instrument ever captures its. There are molecules in the human body so small, so structurally simple, that it seems almost impossible they could carry any significant biological weight. Nitric oxide is one of them, a gas composed of just two atoms, nitrogen and oxygen, existing for mere seconds before it is broken down and absorbed into the surrounding tissue. And yet, in those brief seconds, it accomplishes something that generations of pharmaceutical chemists have spent decades trying to replicate with increasingly complex compounds. It tells your blood vessels to let go. To appreciate why this matters, you have to understand what is happening inside the wall of an artery at any given moment. Wrapped around the inner lining of every blood vessel is a layer of smooth muscle, not the skeletal muscle you consciously control, but an involuntary, always active tissue that maintains a baseline level of contraction called vascular tone. This tone is not pathological. It is necessary, regulating blood flow, directing pressure, responding to the body's constantly shifting demands. But when that tone becomes chronically elevated, when the smooth muscle holds too tightly, too persistently, without adequate signals to release, resistance builds, pressure rises, and the heart is asked to labor against a system that will not yield. Nitric oxide is the body's primary molecular answer to that resistance. It is produced within the endothelial cells, those remarkable cells lining the inner surface of your blood vessels, through the action of an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, or ENOS, which converts an amino acid called L-arginine into this tiny but transformative gas. Once produced, nitric oxide diffuses almost instantly into the surrounding smooth muscle cells, where it activates a cascade of biochemical events that causes those cells to relax. The vessel widens, resistance drops, blood flows with less opposition, the pressure measured at the cuff falls, the heart, for a moment, exhales. What is deeply compelling about this process is that it is entirely endogenous. It originates within the body, through the body's own enzymatic machinery. using raw materials that food can either provide or withhold. Dietary nitrates, found in abundance in beetroot and dark leafy greens, enter a pathway that the body's own biology completes. Bacteria living in the mouth, a population we so often think of as adversarial, something to be eliminated with antiseptic rinses, play an essential cooperative role in converting dietary nitrate to nitrite, which is then further converted to nitric oxide in the acidic environment of the stomach and within the endothelium itself. This is a conversation between the food you eat, the microbial community you carry, and the cellular machinery of your own vascular walls, a chain of biological cooperation so elegant in its design that it deserves a moment of genuine scientific wonder. And the anthocyanins in berries enter this story from a different but complementary direction. Rather than providing the substrate for nitric oxide production, they appear to protect and enhance the enzyme that makes it ANOS by reducing the oxidative stress that would otherwise impair its function. Oxidative stress is, in simplified terms, an excess of chemically reactive molecules that damage cellular components, including the very proteins responsible for producing nitric oxide. When antioxidant-rich foods reduce that oxidative burden, the endothelium regains its capacity to signal vascular relaxation more freely, more reliably, more continuously across the hours and days and years of a human. Blood pressure is rarely the product of a single cause. It is, more accurately, the surface expression of several converging biological pressures, each with its own origin, its own timeline, its own relationship to the choices we make across a lifetime. And among the most illuminating insights that cardiovascular science has offered in recent decades is this: that hypertension is not one problem wearing one face, but at least two distinct physiological stories unfolding simultaneously, often invisibly, often without any symptom to betray their presence. One is written in minerals, the other is written in inflammation. And understanding both changes everything about how we think of food as medicine. The mineral story begins with sodium, not as a villain, but as a molecule whose power we have systematically underestimated. Sodium is essential to life. It governs the electrical gradients across cell membranes, enables nerve transmission, supports muscle contraction. But it is also osmotically powerful, meaning it draws water toward itself with considerable force. When sodium accumulates in the bloodstream in excess, as it does so readily in a diet built around processed and packaged foods, it pulls fluid into the vascular space, expanding blood volume. A greater volume of blood moving through the same network of vessels means higher pressure against those vessel walls. The physics are straightforward. The biological consequence, over years and decades, is not. Potassium works in elegant counterbalance to sodium, and this is where leafy greens, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, silver beet, watercress earn their place in the biology of blood pressure. Potassium encourages the kidneys to excrete sodium rather than retain it, effectively lowering the osmotic burden on the vascular system. It also directly influences the electrical activity of vascular smooth muscle cells, reducing their tendency towards sustained contraction. The ratio of potassium to sodium in the diet is, according to a growing body of evidence, at least as important as the absolute amount of either mineral consumed in isolation. And it is a ratio that modern eating patterns have profoundly distorted, dramatically increasing sodium while simultaneously reducing potassium through the displacement of whole plant foods from the daily plate. Magnesium adds another layer to this mineral conversation, and it does so through a mechanism that bears a striking resemblance to one of the most widely prescribed classes of antihypertensive drugs. Calcium channel blockers work by preventing calcium from entering smooth muscle cells, because calcium is the trigger for muscular contraction, including the contraction of the smooth muscle wrapped around artery walls. Magnesium operates through a physiologically analogous pathway. It competes with calcium at the cellular level, moderating the degree to which smooth muscle contracts, encouraging a state of greater vascular ease. In populations where magnesium intake is chronically low, which in the modern world is a great many populations, this natural buffering capacity is quietly diminished, leaving arterial tone higher than biology ideally intends. But minerals alone do not tell the complete story of why arteries stiffen and pressure climbs. The second narrative, the inflammatory one, runs deeper and longer, operating at the level of the endothelium and the immune system in ways that are still being mapped with increasing scientific resolution. Chronic low-grade inflammation is not the fierce, visible inflammation of an infected wound or an acute injury. It produces no fever, no swelling, no pain that draws attention to itself. It is instead a persistent, smoldering state of immune activation, a biological environment in which inflammatory signaling molecules called cytokines circulate at subtly elevated levels month after month, year after year, gradually altering the behavior and structure of tissues throughout the body, including the arterial wall. Within the endothelium, this inflammatory environment has specific and measurable consequences. It reduces the production of nitric oxide, compromising the vessel's capacity for relaxation. It increases the permeability of the endothelial lining, allowing lipids and immune cells to infiltrate the arterial wall. It activates processes that contribute to the accumulation of arterial plaque and the progressive stiffening of vessel structure. And it does all of this without any dramatic announcement, silently compounding across the decades between a person's 30s and their 60s, until the cumulative effect finally registers as elevated pressure, reduced vascular compliance, and a cardiovascular system working significantly harder than it. There is a particular temptation, when we speak about health and longevity, to reach for the extraordinary, to search the furthest corners of nutritional science for the rare compound, the exotic superfood, the discovery so new it has not yet found its way into common knowledge. And while that search has its place, it can quietly blind us to something that has been sitting on our tables, in our gardens, in our grandmother's kitchens for centuries, the profound biological depth concealed inside the most ordinary foods we have ever known. Oats are perhaps the most democratic food in human history. They have fed peasants and philosophers, sustained working populations through hard winters, appeared on breakfast tables across every economic stratum with remarkable consistency. There is nothing glamorous about a bowl of porridge. There is no mystique surrounding it, no marketing mythology, no premium price attached to its simplicity. And yet, inside that humble grain lives a soluble fiber called beta-glucan that does something in the human digestive system of genuine cardiovascular significance. As it moves through the gut, beta-glucan absorbs water and forms a viscous, gel-like substance that slows digestion, moderates the absorption of sugars, and engages the gut microbiome, that vast, still being understood community of microorganisms living in your intestines, in ways that appear to influence vascular resistance and blood pressure through pathways that science is only now beginning to trace with precision. The mechanism is not yet fully mapped, but the outcome, observed consistently across multiple studies in older adults, is a measurable reduction in both systolic and diastolic pressure over time. Something as ancient and unassuming as morning porridge becomes, in this scientific light, a daily act of deliberate vascular maintenance. And then there is olive oil, perhaps the most philosophically rich of all 5 foods, because it does not arrive alone. It arrives carrying with it an entire civilization's relationship with slowness, with land, with the patient tending of something that takes decades to mature. The olive tree does not hurry. It grows across generations, rooting itself deeply, producing fruit that must be carefully harvested and pressed to yield an oil whose biological generosity is entirely disproportionate to its simplicity. Oleic acid, its primary fatty acid, integrates into the membranes of endothelial cells, making those membranes more fluid, more responsive to the signals that govern vascular tone. The polyphenols it carries, particularly oleocanthal and hydroxytyrosol, possess antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties that address the oxidative stress accumulating in arterial walls across the years of a human life. They do not eliminate that stress. They moderate it, the way a wise presence moderates a difficult conversation, not by dominating it, but by consistently, patiently shifting its direction towards something more sustainable. What unites beetroot and berries and leafy greens and oats and olive oil is not magic. It is molecular coherence. Each of these foods participates in the biology of your blood vessels through mechanisms that are documented, physiologically consistent, and increasingly well understood. Each speaks a language your endothelium already knows, and each reminds us that the most powerful things available to us in the pursuit of a longer, healthier, more vital life are often the ones we have already been walking past in the market, placing in our baskets without fully appreciating what we were carrying home. 60 is not a threshold of limitation. It is an invitation to a more conscious, more grateful, more scientifically informed relationship with the body that has served you without complaint for every single day of your existence. The kitchen is not separate from the clinic. The plate is not separate from the prescription. They are part of one continuous conversation about how well and how fully you intend to live. And that conversation belongs entirely to you 3 times a day for every remarkable day that remains. If this reflection has stirred something in you, a curiosity, a renewed sense of what is possible through the simple act of eating with intention, then carry that feeling forward and join the community that keeps it alive. Head over to YouTube and find Dr. Martin Hale, your trusted voice in senior health, where every video is built on the same foundation as this speech: deep science, compassionate delivery, and an unwavering belief in the body's capacity to thrive at every age. If this moved you, give it a like so others who need it can find it. Share it with someone you love who is navigating these years alongside you. And follow the channel so that nothing made for your health and your well-being ever passes you.